Hello, everybody. Welcome in. My name is Abby and I work for the Center for Teaching Excellence, and I am happy to say that we will be starting our event for today. I will hand it over to Betsy, who will be the main presenter for today, and Ravel, who will also be presenting with her. So Betsy.
Thank you so much, Abby. I hadn't realized I was muted. I'm Betsy Gilliland. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Second Language Studies. And my area of expertise is second language writing, but I have been teaching graduate students at UH for coming up on 10 years now. And so I have developed some strategies for working with all graduate students, not just second language writers. And so I hope that what we talk about today will be useful to you, no matter who your graduate students are and what they need to write. So I'll let Ravel introduce herself and then I'll put the slides up. I am giving you a link in the handout to a Google Doc that has some links to other things. It also has the slides in it, so you are welcome to follow along with those if you want, or just bookmark them for later. So Ravel, please.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, everybody, for giving me this opportunity to be here. I'm Rabil Qayyum. I'm a first-year student in the PhD program in the Department of Second Language Studies. And Betsy is my advisor, and my area of interest is also second language writing. I have a lot of experience of teaching writing in Pakistan, and I've also worked in different capacities here in the US as a tutor. I worked at the Writing Center here at UHM as well. And I'll mostly be talking about my experience of helping graduate students with their writing. Thank you.
So here we go, getting started. All right, so sorry, let me get my notes up and I will be ready to go. Okay, so our focus is on supporting graduate students writing, and we're not going to talk a lot about actually teaching writing. What we're going to be talking about is all of those things that go around what happens when you're supporting someone to learn to write in a new way. So our agenda for today is that we will start with just a bit of an overview, kind of a little lecture on what makes grad students different from undergrads when it comes to writing. Because sometimes we forget that graduate school is a very different thing than undergraduate programs. And so even students who were good writers as undergrads may suddenly realize in grad school that there's different things for them to do. We'll give you a few teaching tips, things that you can work into your own practice. Ravel will talk a bit more about supporting student writing groups, which is an excellent way to help students keep up with their writing and get feedback on their writing and not take up more faculty time, which is always at a premium as well. And then some pointers on supporting thesis and dissertation writing and writing for publication. We've also got a lot of resources for you. There's tons of books on this subject. So if you look at the handout, which is, I provided in the handout that is here, for those of you that have just joined us, we've offered a lot of links. So please feel free to click through to all of those. The other thing that we realize is we only have a limited perspective on this. I've been working with graduate students at UH for 10 years, but only in second language studies and a couple of related departments. So you may have far more experience than I do supporting graduate students. You may know of resources, you may know of ideas specific to your discipline that would be helpful. So we made another Google Doc, a shared one that you can edit. And what we would love is for you to contribute, help each other out, build a collaborative resource document. So the link to that is in our main handout. And throughout the workshop, feel free to type in your comments, type in your ideas. If you're willing to talk more about it with people, add your contact information so that they can follow up with you. Same with if somebody writes something and you have questions about it, you can add a comment to the Google Doc and ask about it. But it's another one to bookmark and come back to later as well. So if you know of books that you recommend, websites that have tools or other things, resources, places that students can go, any of that, or ideas to work into your teaching, we would love to hear more of what you've done in your practice too. Okay, so starting off with what makes graduate student writing different from undergraduate writing? The first of them is the student writers themselves are different. We usually think about foundations writing for first year composition as mostly introducing new ideas. Yes, students write in high school, but it's so limited compared to the many kinds of writing that they have to do as undergrad. So we treat foundations writing requirements as kind of introduction to a new thing. But in general, college level writing is much more what's considered knowledge telling. Students are learning concepts that we already know. They're showing us that they've learned something new, summarizing them, reviewing the literature. Research projects often are somewhat basic. They're things that scholars have already proven. And then students get to graduate school. And even if they were really good at knowledge telling, they may not be able to do that next step, which is referred to as knowledge creating, sharing new ideas, things that have not been researched before, or putting them together in ways that haven't been done before. So even if they were very experienced, highly, they got straight A students in college, when they get to grad school, they may come up against new things that they didn't know how to do. And the imposter syndrome is a very real thing. And so coming into grad school is a place where it hits writers really hard, because they thought they were good at what they were doing, and then suddenly they realize other people know a lot more than they do, other people have more experience, and they don't necessarily feel very confident. They may lose a lot of that drive that they had before. The other one, this is, sorry for abbreviations out of second language studies, L2, second language writers, people who are doing graduate school in a language other than the language they grew up in. A lot of our graduate students did their undergrad in their home country. So they were writing in the language that they were very comfortable with, that they had high levels of expertise in. And then they come to graduate school and suddenly they have to write in English, which is not necessarily a language they're comfortable writing in. And that too can deal a pretty strong blow to someone who thinks, well, I've been admitted to grad school, I know my subject matter, I know what I'm doing, I can write about it in my first language, but suddenly you're telling me to write about it in English, and I just don't feel confident with English in at least enough to tell my story in it. So writers are definitely different undergrad to grad. Another is what we ask students to do in terms of the processes of their writing. You may have encountered grad students that write literature reviews that are literally a series of paragraphs summarizing various articles they've read, which is often all they're asked to do as undergrad. But in graduate school, we don't want them to stop there. We want them to synthesize. We want them to argue from the literature and from the research that they do. So even the process of reviewing the literature is different as graduate students. We expect students to do multiple drafts over time. I was an undergrad who was able to pull an all-nighter and turn out at least an A- quality paper on a first draft. I got to grad school and things just hit me over the head. You cannot write a graduate school paper overnight in a first draft and expect it to be good or get a good grade on it. So doing this process in multiple drafts over time is a totally new process for people who were good writers as undergrads. Potentially, some of our undergrads have developed these strategies during their undergrad time and are able to just build on it. But then there's a lot of students who may never have written a truly multi-draft paper on their own without being required to turn in drafts to a professor or something. Another is the idea of reusing text. So often in undergrad, we tell students, every assignment has to be original. You cannot use a paper you wrote for another class or for another assignment in this one. You've got to create completely new text. But if you think about what a PhD dissertation is, an awful lot of that lit review should actually be recycled from the proposal, from the prospectus, possibly things that students wrote, taking pieces out of papers they wrote during their coursework. There's text, as long as it's their own text. I mean, plagiarism, obviously, if you're copying somebody else's text, that's not good. But if you're taking your own text, stuff that you wrote in a class, that's actually good practice for graduate school writing, because it's using what you've already done and building your ability to contribute. So that's a conceptual process that students may need to get over as well. And then there's the idea of collaboration and consultation. Another message that undergrads are often given is do it yourself. Do not, this is a test, you cannot do this, you can't talk to anybody else. And yet in actual academic work, we consult all the time. We work with colleagues across the world. We talk to each other regularly. We have groups, writing groups, where we share our writing and get feedback from each other. We co-write things. And these are all processes that graduate school needs to help students learn how to do as well. So another thing that's different in grad school is the genres that students are writing. Undergrad is, as I said before, mostly that knowledge telling, summarize things you've read, maybe make an argument out of it, but that's generally where it stops. Literature reviews in grad school are for the purpose of showing where that gap is. Where does your own original work fit? It's not just to say, here's what we already know, but also here's what we don't know. And making a case for doing your own research. So then also writing a proposal, writing a research report, let's see, other things. And then there's these things that are called occluded genres. The idea of things that you can't really find models of. So a journal article, there's lots of those out there. Research proposals, not as many, but usually if you're writing a proposal for a grant or something, there might be a model out there from the organization. There are at least step-by-step sections you need to include. But it's still not as easy to find those models. Conference abstracts, if you've never reviewed an abstract, you probably have no idea what a conference abstract should look like, what structure it should take. And so these are things that grad students are expected to write without having that resource of, here's what it looks like, here's 100 different models of how other people have done it. So lots of genres that suddenly become relevant in grad school. And if you can name another one, please add something to the chat. Let us know what are some of those genres that you guys are unique to or new to graduate students. Not necessarily unique. You probably, as an academic, write these a lot. So feel free to add into the chat anytime you think of something that would be helpful. Then there's the idea of who is going to read their paper. So in undergrad, that relationship of writers and readers is the writer is the person who didn't know something and just learned it. The reader is someone who's an expert in that subject, and the writer's goal is to prove that they've learned something new. Grad school is almost the opposite. And especially as we move towards a dissertation, because the dissertation is a place where the writer is the only one who's truly an expert in all aspects of their study. In many, many fields, you put together a committee because each faculty member has expertise in some piece of it. And the grad student is the one that's actually putting all those pieces together. And so a dissertation is actually written to say, here's new knowledge. Nobody in the world knew this before I did this research. And even you, my committee members, may not have known all of these things. So the readership is actually wanting to see, you know, what new information do you have for me? How have you come up with this? There's also these external audiences. Undergrads rarely write for anybody other than their professors. But grad students actually need to write for a lot of people. Grants, anytime they're applying for some sort of a grant, there's a committee of unknown grant readers that they have to be writing for. Conferences, we hope our grad students are presenting at conferences, so they need to be writing these abstracts aimed at whoever the reviewers are for the conference. Same with journals. If your grad students actually are writing articles that are going to peer-reviewed journals, they need to be thinking about that. So if you want to add to the chat, let us know, what are some of the other audiences your students write for? And here's a slightly bigger question. So audiences, genres, readers, writers themselves, what other ways do you see your grad students being different from undergrad? I know it's hard on Zoom to make this a participatory kind of workshop, so that's why I'm trying to use the chat to get you to share your thoughts. You don't even have to speak, just type something in the chat. And please send it, put it in the public chat so everybody can see it. I've got one private chat talking about business writing as something that's also overlooked. And also comments about writing for each other. Policy advocacy in another field. These are great, yeah. So really thinking about all of these different areas where grad students have to actually write for people who care about what they're reading, what they're writing. It's not that as teaching undergrads, we don't care what they're writing, but we're reading it for a very different purpose. And then we've also got writing in formal and scientific ways. So really taking on that language of a particular discipline too, which as an undergrad, you may not be as required. And reader, yeah, so sometimes these readers are less forgiving, or they're judging based on other qualities. They may not even know that writers are grad students. Oh my gosh, yes, the idea of verbosity. My purely anecdotal analysis is, if you went to high school and undergrad in the United States, you learned how to write in a very wordy way, because it was usually a struggle to meet a minimum word count. You know, you must write 1,000 words. Oh my gosh, I only have like 500 words worth of things to say. So I need to figure out, instead of 3 words, how can I say this in 20? And then suddenly in grad school, they actually have things to say, and trying to fit it into a maximum word count is really hard. I haven't seen it being as difficult for second language writers, but anybody that got through high school and college in the US has developed a way of writing in a very verbose way to fill word counts. And yeah, so clear and concise is a new concept for a lot of graduate students. Okay, so moving on, feel free to keep adding your thoughts. Here's just a few teaching suggestions, and I'm going to get you engaged a bit now. we are going to do a genre moves analysis, which is a really helpful way for students to start studying the kinds of texts that they need to write. Because we don't have textbooks that walk you through doing this for the most part. So what you need to do is actually find the models of the text that you're going to write and study how is it done? What's the process? So according to John Swales, who's a sociolinguist who's done a lot of analysis of written text, moves are functional chunks of text that accomplish particular purposes. So sometimes it's a single word, sometimes it's a few words, a phrase, sometimes it's a full paragraph to move the text along and indicate a particular purpose of that section of the text. There's also a lot of times where it's a chunk of formulaic or very standardized language, which means that sometimes it's not plagiarism to copy a 5 or 10 word chunk of text, because that same chunk appears in thousands of journal articles or abstracts or something like that. So formulaic language is a big part of making these moves. Sometimes moves are mandatory. So every time you write a research abstract, you must do this. Sometimes they're optional. So some abstracts do this, some abstracts don't, but it's still something that's common in abstracts, even if it's not in all abstracts. So how to do this? Number one is to collect representative samples of the genre in your field. So that's part of why it's hard to find textbooks that will teach how to do this kind of thing, because whatever your very specific field is, that's what your grad students need to learn how to write, not research abstracts for anything, social sciences, natural sciences, humanities, etc. But rather exactly what your field is does this slightly differently from other fields. So finding as many samples as you can, and then really breaking it down to see what does each piece of that text do and how does it do it? So what's the order of the moves? What language indicates that you're doing those moves? And what of that is formulaic? What could you kind of use to make your own template for writing that? So here's from Swales and his colleague, Christine Speak, who've written quite a few really helpful books about writing for graduate school. Quite frequently, these are the moves in a research abstract. So if you think about the little paragraph at the beginning of a journal article, usually the first move, which may even be just one sentence, is some kind of background and introduction. What do we know about the topic? Why is it important to study? Next move, what's this article about? What's the purpose of this particular research study? Third move, what methods, what materials, who are the subjects, what procedures were done? How was this study done? 4, sometimes a sentence, sometimes multiple sentences. What did they find out? And 5, usually these end with some kind of discussion, conclusion, implication, recommendation. So what does it mean? So briefly, very, very briefly, I'm going to have you click through to a journal article abstract that's linked on your handout. It's about graduate student writers, by the way. So if you're interested, you can go ahead and read it. You don't have to download the article, just look at the abstract. And see if you can break it down into moves. So think about what does each sentence do? Are there multiple sentences in one move? Where do you see formulaic chunks of language? I'm not going to give you a lot of time to do this because unfortunately with a slightly more than 1 hour workshop, we really don't have time for it, but. And then if you see anything, feel free to just type a little thing in the chat. Let us know. What have you noticed? And here, I can go back to the table. So you can see Swale's labels for those. If you think you can identify some of those moves. All right, because this is a Zoom session and I can't see if anybody's actually reading or anything. Might all be checking your email. I have no idea. Type in the chat, what do you see? So this is the first sentence of that abstract. What would you say this is doing? You can either use those labels from Swales or give it another label, because these moves don't have official labels. It's more you trying to say, what is it doing? So can anybody offer a label for this? What is this particular sentence doing? All right. Background introduction, introducing the main topic. What language? And yeah, and establishing the research territory too. Yeah, background information. Or potentially calling it the problem statement. Yeah, so what words do you see in this that help you know it's framing some kind of a problem? Although, yeah. So although in this situation is a really good flag for what I'm going to do is set it up to say, here's something that we do, but something else is problematic. And that's where although comes from. And then the thing that's problematic is the source of stress. So actually, the thing that's problematic is the requirements, and then how you know it's a problem is it's labeled as source of stress. All right, what about sentence 2? What is sentence 2 doing? This is kind of a trick question. So if you're looking at the Swales table. Okay, thank you. Research question plus method. So this sentence is actually doing 2 things that Swales had separated. So it's both the questions, what is the focus of this study, but also what kind of study is it? What did they do to conduct the research? All right. Question 3, or item 3, this very, very long sentence. It's got parts A, B, and C. What does it do? What moves is it moves is it making? Results and findings. Yeah. So figuring out what came out of this? What issues did they find after doing the case study? And it's long because that's kind of the focus. And then the very last sentence, what would you call this one? Who cares? Yes. I actually usually say, so what? But yes, same thing. What's the matter with what do we do about it? You know, it's great that you found this, but so what? And the official label for it would be implication. So the things that come out of it. But yeah, colloquial language like who cares is often a really good way to help students understand and connect those fancy words like implication to the way they would talk about it on their own. So genre study is a great one to build into assignments in graduate classes, really helping students start learning what does it look like to write this kind of thing? Because you may have assignments that ask students to write the genres of the profession, but if you don't also build in this opportunity to learn what those genres look like, students may actually not know what they're supposed to do because they're so used to that knowledge telling. Here's my information that I read in a book, and I'm going to just give it to you. Whereas so often we're saying, make an argument, find that gap, identify what's problematic about what exists. Building in process for assignments is important too. Really helping students who may not be yet as good at time management, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But kind of pushing them to write in multiple drafts. So potentially having an in-class brainstorming session, having students turn in a proposal for a project before they actually do it and write about it. Building in ways that students can provide peer feedback to each other so that as the instructor, you don't have to give them feedback all the time, but that they know you can actually ask other people to help you with this. And then another one, allowing for resubmission, because a lot of students, I mean, in my experience at least, if you tell students ahead of time, you can give me an early draft and I'll give you feedback on it and then you submit it. The ones who are going to do that are the ones who are probably going to get an A anyway, because they write faster, they already know what they want to say, and so they'll do it in advance and ask for feedback and then revise it. The ones who are struggling are not going to be able to do that because they'll be working against the deadline, and whatever minute you've set for the submission, they'll submit it a minute before that, or maybe it'll even come in late, and then they get whatever grade they get, and it may be that midnight, pulling an all-nighter kind of draft. So instead, and LaLima allows you to do this, set it so everybody turns it in at a particular time. Instructor provides feedback, and then you can check allow for resubmission and create a new deadline where if they want to revise it, they can resubmit it. And in that way, everybody gets the feedback, and then if they choose to revise it, then they go through and use it and revise it. And it gives a bit more of a window to the students who are more struggling. And I found that some students actually do take me up on that. The ones who don't care at all won't resubmit, they get whatever grade is already in place. But hopefully with graduate students, they're a bit more driven and they will actually take advantage of that. So something else related to providing feedback then is really making it possible for students to think of themselves as professionals and as writers in the discipline rather than as students. So turning over the focus to the students, have them write some kind of a cover letter or a note that says, this is where I was struggling, this is what I want my feedback on, or I'm not sure I was able to do this well, so please help me in that way. As the grader, reading for a purpose. So trying not to get distracted by potentially some kind of a language error when what you really want to see is, were they able to describe the research method and then actually carry it out? So try not to focus on language as you're making sense of the bigger thing. Another is pointing out the positive. And this kind of comes back to that idea of the imposter syndrome. A grad student who has internalized an idea that they are totally not supposed to be there, that somehow it was a fluke that they were admitted to grad school, may think everything I do is awful. I thought I was good, and then I got to grad school, and now I realize everybody's smarter than I am. Everybody's a better writer than I am. So in providing feedback, it's also really important for us to help the students see, you've got things here. Yeah, of course there's issues. You're still a student, you're still learning how to do this, but look at how well you did this thing. And then in terms of language, really focusing on what gets in the way of understanding. What are some patterns of error? So if you notice that, and method sections are one area where verb tenses are really important. Procedures are done in a particular order. There may be conditionals, if this happened, then we did that. If something else, then we did something else. And then also stigmatizing errors. So things that aren't huge, but that readers will think poorly of the writer if you see that kind of thing in their paper. So focus on those. Don't worry about every single comma error, because remember that collaboration and having other resources. It's also really good for grad students to start figuring out who can they turn to get help with editing. This isn't a language class. I mean, unless you are doing a master's degree in a particular language, then you really do need to prove that you know that language. But if you're doing a master's degree in chemistry, commas are not always that important. Sometimes they are. And that's where if the comma placement gets in the way of actually explaining what you did or what you found, then it's a problem. But if it's just a grammar rule kind of comma thing, let the student know that those are errors, but also say, the most useful thing for you is not to try to learn this on your own, but rather to find someone that can help you. Do you have a friend who's a good editor? Please do not tell the student, do you have a friend who's a native speaker? Because in my experience, most native speakers of English are awful editors. There's a lot of non-native speakers who are much better editors. So what you want is your student to find someone who's a good copy editor. And then they can try to work out an exchange. Maybe they make dinner for that person each time they proofread a paper for them or something like that. But that's a perfectly legitimate use of their resources. And it's something they should get in the habit of doing if they know they make these kinds of language errors too. Because that's a better use of their time to really think about the science of it or whatever their research focus is. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Rabel now to talk a bit about writing groups, which is another way they can find their resources.
Thank you, Betsy. So this is a project that I'm working on. I'm collecting data on this. Graduate student, you can all hear me? Yeah. So graduate student writing groups are, it's a very interesting concept in the sense that this is a whole new space for writers to work on their writing skills. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I'll be talking about what they are, what are some of the benefits of this space, and how can we help students set up this space. So basically, writing groups are of many different kinds, but they are a group of students, small groups, usually 3 to 4 students who commit to meet regularly to work on their writing skills. Sometimes they're facilitated by a tutor, but sometimes they can work on their own. So the purpose of these groups could be several. It could just be silent writing time. These groups are for those students who are struggling to find time for their writing. So they can decide to all meet regularly on a specific day, and they are all working on their writing skills. You must have also heard of writing retreats. So they work on in the same way, that this is just allocated time for students to write, actually get down to the act of writing. There could also be accountability groups. Accountability groups they work in the sense that this is for students to check on each other, make sure they're meeting their weekly tasks, goals, and they ask each other, what's the update on that, or if there are any roadblocks, they also brainstorm ways to work around those issues. or they could be feedback groups. That's what I am working on. These are groups where the students meet together and they give feedback to each other on their writing. You can also mix and match these. Population of these groups, again, it could be discipline specific, so all the students belong to the same department, or they could be cross-disciplinary, so students from different majors, different backgrounds, they form a group together. Again, or it could again be a mix of both, so their level of study could be master's, doctoral, or you could have a mix and match of both. Next slide, please. This is a social, collegial, supportive space which contributes to students evolving development as writers, especially for doctoral students. When they get to the dissertation state, they are mostly working in isolation. So at that time, writing groups could be really beneficial for students to get to work with each other, meet other people, get fresh perspective, fresh ideas into their writing, and again, get more support and more feedback. Especially talking about feedback groups. So participation in such groups helps both the authors and the readers. It gives them an opportunity to look at writing from different perspectives and learn from each other, especially if they are coming from different disciplines. And they learn to understand how scholarly writing is produced in their field. So all in all, they provide support, community, structure, and accountability, or multidisciplinary perspective, depends on what kind of groups we are setting up. Next slide, please. So this is what I am working on. I am facilitating 2 graduate student writing groups, and my focus is on how feedback is given in these groups, what kind of feedback is given in these groups, and my own role as a facilitator. So what happens is that these are online groups, they meet each week. Students take turn to give feedback on each other. They decide what to present, so what writing that's going to be under discussion. They all take turns. And most of them actually repeat that writing in the sense that they're working on one section. They will revise that, they will present that section again in the future meeting. There are few students who choose to present different things. So sometimes they'll present a cover letter, sometimes they'll present a scholarly paper, it varies. Before the meeting, they have to give feedback to each other in terms of written comments. So overall, it combines both written and oral feedback, which is very useful and very helpful for students. So we have a shared drive for all the groups, and they write their comments on the Google Drive. That's how they get feedback. And then during the meeting, the writer will introduce the topic, what they're presenting, and how did they write that, or any major obstacle they had, or what their feedback needs are. And then they'll go read each comment and resolve each comment. They'll have a discussion on the comments that are given. My role was especially important in the beginning, in the setting up of the groups, but now I'm feeling that I'm less and less involved in this as students have sort of taken over and they're managing things on their own. So my job was to negotiate the norms, set them up, schedule the meeting, organize the space. From time to time, I suggest different resources to them, mostly online. There are tons of resources available. So I'll just let students know about that, members know about that. Initially, I also taught them some effective feedback strategies, but now, as I said, they're working on their own mostly. And sometimes I would also comment on writing. So my job is not really to provide them with feedback. I don't share my own writing, but this is to help them give feedback to each other and sort of manage the space, get them going. Next slide, please. So these are the 2 groups I'm working with. The first group, we've had more meetings. So we've had 8 meetings so far. The second group sort of started in the middle of the semester. The first group, as you can see, has both master's and doctoral students, but the second one is purely all of the students are doctoral students. You see a nice mix and match of the disciplines. So these are students coming from different disciplines. Their language background is also different. Some are monolingual, some are not. And my experience in both these groups is also different. So I feel that each group has its own dynamics. The way I set up these groups were basically, this was my research study. So these are all the participants who are available. But in other cases, it's up to the students, their aims and expectations, how they set up their own groups. Next slide, please. So in terms of training, as I said initially, in the first few meetings, we talked about how to give feedback, how to ask for feedback, on what aspects can they give feedback on. So there was a little bit of, I would have mini sessions in the beginning of the meetings before they started giving feedback to each other. So I thought some understanding about how feedback works, or what is useful feedback, what is not useful feedback, was also helpful for the members. Next slide, please. So this is what I have observed so far. Many times participants have appreciated their the space, that it's really beneficial for them. I plan to interview them also at the end of the semester, so I've not gotten to that yet. So this is just data from the meeting. You would think that these are multidisciplinary groups, so maybe all they would give feedback on would be grammar correction, punctuation mistakes, but that is not the case. Participants get really involved in each other's writing, and they really make an effort to understand what is their writing about. Similarly, writers would write in a way to make it accessible to people who for whom this is not their discipline. So they would perhaps provide definitions on the side. They would remove the references just to make it easier for the other person to understand. But a lot of the times they would also explain the jargon or what they have written. So they will have to make that effort, which is again very beneficial for their writing. So most of it is higher level feedback. Many times students will get an opportunity to brainstorm different ways to do something. So they will ask each other about formats, if they're learning to use a software. So other person would say, oh, I've done this in my class, so you can use these resources. So, they'll get an opportunity to share that with each other. This is a different space in the sense that very rarely would students get an opportunity to work with somebody who's not from their discipline. So they get to look at a particular thing from a different perspective. There's also the aspect of built-in accountability, in the sense that when it's that you are presenting next, and if you've not produced something, then you will feel that pressure to produce something, so that we can have a meeting, next meeting. So there's that aspect of built-in accountability there. I've already talked about how writers would also make adjustments so that their writing is accessible to other people. And they will also explain the conventions in their field, that in my field, future studies section is written in this way. In other discipline, it is not written in that way. So they'll also share that knowledge. 3, I believe, is a very good number, especially if you also have a facilitator, that is me. Because it's easier to schedule meetings that way. Initially, I had some difficulty in setting up meetings. I would send when is good to everybody, and we'll never have a meeting time. So, but then I felt that maybe 3 to 4 meetings later, I was able to fix the slot. So that's our slot. But if you have more people, it will become difficult for you to schedule meetings because your schedule will never align. Next slide, please. So how can we set up writing groups? It could be both in class and outside class, a student initiative like it is in this case. In many other universities, writing groups are actually facilitated by the writing center. So you have a writing center tutor who's helping students do that. And they are the ones who are putting students together and deciding who works with whom. But I think faculty members can also do that. They can create spaces in their assignments to make students get together with each other. But then the main thing really is sharing expectations and norms. This is key. All members have to be on the same page as to what they want from the group. Do they want silent writing time? Do they want accountability? Do they want feedback? What do they want? What kind of feedback are they looking for? When we were negotiating norms, we talked about everything. And there I've added some useful resources in our shared folder. You can take a look at that. So you have to talk about how are we going to communicate between meetings? What happens if a member is not able to attend a meeting? What happens if a member feels that their expectations are not being met? So you need to talk about all these things beforehand. Otherwise, there could be lots of conflict and the students will not feel motivated and they could feel that this is a major waste of time. Next slide. Yeah, so that's about it. If there are any questions about this project, please let me know. And then we can move back to Betsy.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Rabel. I'm really excited about her project. This might become her dissertation project too, so we may have a much larger set of implications for facilitating graduate writing groups coming very soon. All right, so I wanted to also focus on other aspects of supporting thesis and dissertation writers. So the writing groups are an essential thing, help students find that community. But I think there's also quite a lot of other psychological things that graduate students go through and need to kind of change the way they look at their work in order to really succeed at these really big projects, theses and dissertations, which are the ultimate in multi-draft, multi-reader, expert knowledge presentation kind of genres. So one of them is really just that time management thing. Setting up the environment so that they're able to do it and so that they feel able to do it. One really important one is that writing space. I am not a big fan of writing in cafes. I know some people like it. I feel like I need to get into a very specific mindset for writing. And so having a desk, whether it's on campus or at home, in the library or in an office, is really important because then it frames the writing. This is where you do writing. It should be comfortable enough that you can sit at it for a long period of time, but not necessarily so comfortable that you are tempted to fall asleep. So I know a few people that write, just have a laptop and they kind of lounge down on the couch and write there. I don't know if that's necessarily a really good approach because it does lend itself then to that temptation of, oh, I could just close my eyes for a little bit, take a nap, something like that. So that writing space, the place where you write. If a student does think a cafe is the perfect place to write, they might want to just consider, doing a bit of analysis. Where do I sit when I feel the most productive? What other tools, do I need noise canceling headphones, or does somehow the noise, kind of background noise, if the cafe is loud enough, you don't necessarily get distracted by music and people talking. So figuring those things out and then sticking with it. And that's where time management is so important. I'll talk about the Pomodoro technique on the next slide. I have a whole slide about it, but really making it a habit, scheduling writing sessions, treating that writing time as sacred. So I'm a big reader of academic writing advice books, and almost all of them say the exact same thing, that scheduling periods of time for writing and treating them just as much as like teaching as a fixed thing on a schedule. So not agreeing to do meetings or activities during those times. And treating those times as sacred for writing, not for grading, not for checking email, making it exactly what you want, just focus on writing. And some grad students may also need to start setting limits for themselves on reading versus writing, because it can be very tempting to say, oh, but there's one more article I need to read. I can't start writing my lit review until I've read this new special issue of the journal or this new book that's about my topic. And so if that's the case, then also saying, you know, I will do writing in this time and reading in this time and keep the two separate. Another one is to choose times when the writer is most awake. So some people I know, and a lot of the writing advice books say doing writing as the very first thing in the day can be most useful because your mind is fresh and you're not distracted and stuff. I know people with small kids who get up at 4 in the morning and do their writing from 4 to 7, and then the kids get up and then they have distractions all day. I, for one, don't function very well early in the morning, so I actually prefer to start my work day, check all my emails, clean all of that stuff out, and then sometime, you know, like 9:30 or 10 in the morning, then I start my writing time. And when I'm good at that, which I'm not always, that's when I turn off the emails, do not check email, don't let other people distract me, don't even answer the phone. And then that's my writing time. But whatever time works best, if it's on the schedule and it's a thing that you need to do all the time, that's a really good way of building a habit. I am also a huge fan of rewards for writing. It could be something as small as this sticker chart kind of thing. So every time you do a writing session, put a sticker on it. And then think about, you know, when you get all the way to the end, you did it, but what are you going to give yourself? You know, is this going to be time to go to the movies? Is it time to have an ice cream cone or whatever reward, buy a new book, something like that. Also, scheduling in leisure time. This is something I've seen in a few books. Belcher's How to Write Your Journal article book especially stresses it, that just as you schedule your writing time, you need to schedule your not writing time. And for some people, that's what you have to do. So if you say, I will write during this time, and then at this particular time, so either, you know, an hour or two in the evening, or maybe even block off an entire weekend day, I will not write and I won't feel guilty about it because I did my writing during my scheduled time. So these are the kind of psychological things that grad students may not be aware are helpful at managing the writing and getting things done, and without having to think the way they used to as, oh, I could write the entire paper overnight. That's what, I can't remember his first name, but last name is Sylvia. He calls it binge writing. So, and a lot of professors do this too. We look at our schedules and we're like, oh my gosh, we're so busy this semester. I'm going to use winter break. I'm just going to write an entire article during winter break because I don't have to teach at that point. And that could be exhausting, and it doesn't create as good quality work. So really thinking about scheduling the writing and rewarding yourself for doing the writing on a regular basis can really help students. Yes, and Elizabeth, thank you for pointing out the writing room. Is that's open to grad students as well as professors or faculty? Yes, okay, excellent. So yeah, please let them know about it. Let your grad students know that they could come to the virtual writing room, and it's literally a space for writing. It's not feedback, not advice, just a connection so that you have a time set aside for writing. I'm also a big fan of regular check-ins, and these can be with an advisor. So even if you're supervising a student and you aren't doing a independent study or anything with them, you might have them every week or every other week send you an email or drop by your office at a particular time and just let you know what they're doing. They could send writing if they're producing something, but I would also argue not to require writing that you would actually read, because I think that can be a bit distracting for students. because then they start putting pressure on themselves as every time I have to produce good writing if I'm going to get feedback on it. But if you have them just send something to say, look, I wrote today or I wrote this week, that can be really helpful. Peer groups can be good too. So it could be just a sit and write. And there's a good deal of peer pressure in there not to check social media. If somebody looks over your shoulder and they see that you're reading emails, that can be good motivation to keep focusing on writing. All right, so I realize I've been talking kind of long. We're nearing the end. The Pomodoro technique has been around quite a while now, and I think Pomodoro is actually copyrighted, but there's plenty of free timers online that you don't need to pay anything for it. The basic idea is breaking work down into small chunks. So rather than saying, today I will write my lit review, say, today I will identify 10 articles that go into the section about this particular topic. And then another task will be, today I will identify the quotations that go into that section. So setting those goals, setting a timer to some short seeming amount of time. So rather than today I will write for 2 hours, say I will do 4 25-minute sections, and then take a little break in between and really focus during each of those on a single task. And then a slightly longer break at some point, because you need to stop and eat lunch and stretch and stuff like that. But this is a way to sustain writing for a much longer period of time than trying to sit and not do anything but write for 2 or 3 hours straight. And then that kind of goes along with the idea of just writing. A lot of grad students get caught up in the idea that everything they produce needs to be perfect. And I mean, we know you get into grad school because you are somewhat type A and you're driven to study something. But for writing this kind of text, you actually have to let go. And so there's a lot of kind of techniques that you can do to get to it. So turning off the spelling and grammar check, hiding those editing toolbars, potentially using a text-only site. So Written Kitten and Write or Die are both like very different kind of rewards or threats, but they're both text box only kind of things. So you write in the text box and then there's nothing besides just the text. No editing, no formatting, no bullet points, none of that. But it allows for just generating text, which is often a really important thing for grad students. Other options, if you can touch type, turning off the monitor or darkening the screen. Or like I was saying before, writing in the presence of other people so you know that somebody else is keeping track of whether you're checking email or not. All right, we are getting close to the end of time. So if you have other tips for maintaining your own writing time, those of you that are faculty who have to do quite a lot of writing, or things that you recommend for graduate students, please put them in the chat or add them to our shared Google Doc too. All right, last thing, just a couple of slides to talk a bit about some of the ways we can support grad students in writing for publication, which we all know for if anybody going into a research intensive job probably will have to write for publication. Potentially even someone in a more public facing job will be needing to write for other reasons, but also needing to write for these public audiences. And I like to think of grad students as apprentices. They're not students, but rather junior scholars. And so apprenticeship of where they're doing the work of being a scholar, but with much more guidance is a really helpful thing. So helping grad students learn how to review manuscripts. If you get invited to review a manuscript, bringing in a grad student who knows about the topic and having them work with you to do the review. Having a grad student help you with writing a paper that they had some part in working on the project. So potentially providing a bit more scaffolding. You know, if you are writing the paper, come up with the outline, decide what section the grad student's going to do, give them even some prompts to write to so that they can do that on more independently. Or other way around, if it's a project that the grad student was mostly responsible for, come in as a second author and help them get it to publication. And I realize some of these are things that in other fields, other disciplines, you do on a regular basis. But in second language studies, at least, we don't do this as much as we might. And so our grad students often do try to write for publication, but sometimes without having a whole lot of understanding of what they're writing for. And so having a second author who's published before can be quite helpful. The other one I want to recommend, and this is a good one to kind of overcome some of that imposter syndrome, is helping students get published at all. So before they feel ready to write for a peer-reviewed journal, maybe having them write for less pressure kind of sources. So there are a lot of journals in various disciplines run by graduate students, and often those they either welcome primarily grad student writing, or they at least have slightly lower bars to get published. Professional organizations have a lot of places where students can publish, and often they're desperate for text too. So it's a good way to get something out there. Book reviews, depending on the journal, it may be an easier way to get into a journal, or book chapters for practitioners. In teaching, there's lots of books that are kind of lesson plans and activities, and they may not be like high stakes peer-reviewed kind of things, but they do give a student a chance to build their CV and have a few things on there. So another opportunity, except that we are running slightly late, so I'm going to say, please share on that Google Doc, or type in the chat if you've got some ideas of ways to help grad students. And then just a few more recommendations. These are some of the books that are in the list on our handout. All of these are great. This particular one, Allison Miller's Finish Your Dissertation Once and for All, that's what got me through my dissertation. I had read a lot of them. I even read this one and wasn't the Write Your Dissertation in 15 Minutes a Day. I wasn't all that inspired. And then I read this one, Finish Your Dissertation Once and for All, and I was like, yes, I can do this. I like this approach. Oh yes, and the mention of how to write a lot. The link to how to write a lot is in the bibliography on the, actually, sorry, no, I didn't put it on here. I meant to. How to Write a Lot is a really good one. It's a very easy read. So students who feel like they don't have time to read something that's not directly related to their work might actually be okay to read it. But yes, these are, and they're for the most part, the methods ones, these kind of things they all say the same thing, same as How to Write a Lot. Schedule your time, do it in little pieces, get feedback. And then these are the kind of books that actually walk students through the genre of academic publishing or academic writing. And so these are useful things too. And then there's an entire world of books for graduate supervisors. So these are all in our bibliography, and there's a lot more as well. But it's kind of helpful. I mean, some of them, like if you're working with non-native English speaking writers and you're not quite sure what to do, these books can really help with understanding what to do to support your own students. Some of them are more general. These two aren't specifically for second language writers, but they're useful for everybody. So all of those, this is the only, this is one of the photos I found online of UH graduate school graduation. So I just figured open access picture. Let's celebrate our graduate students getting through and becoming successful professionals. And we have some time, I think, like 5 minutes maybe, for question and answer. And Rabel and I are both here, so we would be happy to talk about stuff. I will stop share now. And it looks like we've got one question already. Do you think it would be useful for a professor to do a think aloud about how they handle different steps in the process of writing a research paper or journal article? I think it would be very useful. Rabel, do you want to talk from the perspective of being a doctoral student?
Yeah, sure. But I would ask the student first if they are comfortable with it. A lot of students could, feel very shy or conscious about it, or, they might feel being under the microscope. So it depends.
Oh, I think the question actually is, would it benefit you to have a professor share what they do as they're thinking it through?
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, that would be definitely beneficial, because I guess all sorts of opportunities that give us a glimpse of how experts do it is beneficial for us.
Yeah. So yes, think aloud. It would be if you're working on something and you want to model for your student how you're approaching the task, really talking about what you're thinking as you're in the process of writing it can be very helpful. Let's see. So I'm not sure if this is a question or just a comment. Active voice versus passive voice. Passive voice is the bane of grant proposal writing. I think that's a good place for doing some genre analysis. So finding really good models of what that particular kind of grant proposal should look like, what a high scoring one looks like, and then working with the student to identify all those moves, and then to figure out, what kind of language is being used in each step of this. Because you may find that passive voice is actually used a lot in certain sections of a grant proposal, but not in others. You may find that it's used in less successful proposals and not in more successful proposals. You might find it's used for particular purposes. And so really helping a student know, how do I choose the language I need to do for doing things? So we're very much focused on the idea of the function of the language rather than the prescriptive rules for language, because those are very often based on not actually based on how people use language, but somebody randomly 100 years ago decided this should be a rule. Split infinitives are one of those. Has nothing to do with how English has ever been used, but somebody about 150 years ago decided that because Latin doesn't split infinitives, which is because it's actually infinitives in Latin are all part of that one word, English shouldn't either, even though infinitives in English are always two parts. To is a separate word from the verb. So that's a prescriptive rule that actually isn't how English is used. But functional analysis of language is really valuable to understand what does the language look like in a successful version of this genre. So that's my argument for genre analysis. Really look at what does it actually look like, not what the rule that somebody decided without understanding this genre. Other questions or comments or ideas that you have for working with grad student writing? No, at this point. Everybody's ready for lunch. All right, well, our contact information is on the handout, so we are happy to talk more. And please do advocate for your grad students, help them find that community, help them overcome their imposter syndrome, because it's a real thing, and it's definitely a psychological thing.